Graniola. This is the Graniola channel, and I'd like to tell you a folk tale. Folk tales are simple stories that have been told and retold, passed down by word of mouth from generation to generation. They unify people. The story I'd like to tell you now is called Rice.
Often when you listen to a folk tale, you'll know where it comes from. At the end of this story, I'll tell you what part of the world it started in.
There was a hard-working rice farmer who rented a small house and a rice paddy from the richest person in the southern section of the country where she had been born. Although she was poor, if she worked hard, the little paddy would produce 12 bags of rice every year, and by keeping 6 bags and selling 6 bags, there would be enough to eat and also enough money to take care of her simple needs. That was true until one year when a long period of drought was followed by weeks of floods and then a short but damaging hailstorm. That year the young woman could only harvest 1 bag of rice. She knew that she could not live through the winter with only that amount. She could not imagine how she would manage to survive, and at last came to the decision to ask her very wealthy landlord to give her a loan. After all, she had been renting his cottage and paddy for several years and had always paid the rent on time and taken good care of his property. Not wishing to waste time, she set off, walking across the thin layer of ice that was forming on the lake separating her rice paddy from the landlord's magnificent house and gardens. It was late afternoon, and the rotund landlord seemed to be trying to finish off an ample lunch spread at the same time tuck into several waiting tea cakes. The farmer described her predicament and finished by asking for a loan of 1 bag of rice. Speaking with his mouth full, a disagreeable sight, the landlord, in a few words, said that yes, he could proffer the requested bag if the farmer were to promise to repay him with 12 bags by the end of the winter. The farmer was shocked by what seemed to her to be an impossible situation. She had already explained why the past season's crop had failed, and no one ever harvested any grain during the winter months. However, because she was desperate, she kept her thoughts to herself and agreed to his terms and accepted the single bag of rice. She headed home as quickly as she could and began boiling some of the rice. She had been chilled crossing the lake and wanted to eat and then wrap herself up in bed. Just as she set the steaming bowl of the soft, fluffy grains down on the table, she heard a knocking at the door. She opened it and saw a frail old man looking up at her. When he explained that he was lost, she invited him to come in out of the frigid, howling wind. Although she wasn't accustomed to having others drop in on her, she was a generous hostess and offered the bowl of rice which she had been preparing for her own dinner to the stranger. After he had quickly eaten it all, he pointed to the bag of rice next to the stove and said very politely, that is, if it is polite to eat up all of another person's dinner, that he was still hungry. The farmer made 1 bowlful after another, and to her horror, in a short time, the tiny chap had finished off every grain in the bag that had once been just about the same size as himself. Poor farmer had tears in her eyes when he handed her a tarnished coin and said that he was very grateful for her generosity and walked out of the doorway that he had passed through when she had invited him in. She dropped the old coin into the empty rice bag as she wiped a rag across her small dining table. When she turned around, she nearly fell over the bag, which was now filled to the brim with rice, topped with the tarnished old coin. Shocked, she lifted up the small, discolored token and placed it on the bottom of her empty rice bowl, and in seconds it rested on hundreds of shiny white grains. She immediately began boiling the rice and was so hungry that she swallowed every last bit in seconds. When her stomach was full and she could think a little more clearly, she realized that the old man had given her a wonderful gift. Because she was a very responsible person and couldn't stop thinking about the enormous debt that she needed to honor, she wasted no time in going into her storeroom and started moving the coin from one empty bag to another. As she did so, she began picturing the other families whose crop had also been lost because of the drought, the floods, and the hail. The horrible landlord had asked her to return the rice before the end of the winter, and she now knew that she'd be able to do so. In the meantime, she decided to take part of this rice to the market to share with the others who were having difficulties. She did so every few days, and each person she gifted was just as grateful as she had been, because all of them had been faced with starvation just as she had. After a few weeks, it could have been 3 or it might have been a month, the landlord heard of her generosity. He was furious. "She owes 12 bags to me, and yet she's making handouts to the peasants. I don't understand what she's up to. That one bag must have been emptied long ago." He snuck around her little house, which was really his little house because he rented it to her, for 3 or 4 days in a row until he caught sight of her tossing the coin into a bag, which then puffed up, piled to the brim with white grains. He waited until the next time she had gone to the market and then snuck in and stole the coin. He wanted to get back to his house quickly and so didn't pay attention to where he was tromping over the ice and skidded and fell in a place where a huge log had made a break in the surface. The coin fell from his hand, rolled to the crack, and slid into the freezing water below. The landlord furiously cursed his luck and muttered to himself that once he warmed up, he would return to the little house and insist that the farmer immediately repay her debt. The following morning, when the woman went to get the coin and realized that it was missing, she was comforted by telling herself that it had appeared as if by magic and disappeared in the same way. She was grateful that she had been able to use it during the past weeks. She also began to feel sad, picturing how difficult it was going to be not only for herself but also for the other workers to get through the last days of winter. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door, and when she opened it, she saw a large group of people, each of which was carrying a package or a basket with food in it. The farmer was speechless, but that was okay. She didn't need to say anything, because one by one, as they left the gift they were offering, they thanked her for the generosity she had shown. The last man in the group presented her with a huge carp that he told her he had caught while ice fishing in the lake that separated the landlord's mansion from her little cottage. When they had all returned to their own homes, the farmer took out a sharp knife and began to fillet the large fish. When she made the first cut in its belly, she heard a sharp metallic sound, and as she sliced deeper, the tarnished coin fell out of the carp onto her table. She was absolutely delighted, and from that moment on always kept it close to her. but used it less and less, not only because she knew it was a great treasure and felt that showing it about might tempt a possible thief, but also because there was less and less need, since she and her neighbors worked just as hard as they always had, and after getting to know each other due to her generosity, they were always ready to help each other out in times of need. This is a tale that is told in Korea.